Immigration. Whew, now that has been a hot topic throughout the nation of Canada's history. So what I want to do in the next few moments is take a bunch of my research and distill it down into looking at one specific people group's story in the nation of Canada. And I've decided to title this video, Defending White Jesus. I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the comment sections on this video. Now, if you can get past the title, just come with me for a moment while I tell this story. It's a very important story for the nation of Canada. And this story begins in Ireland. In County Kerry, at the Chapel of the Sacred Heart, there is a mural. Now, this mural depicts Luke's famous story of the boy Jesus in the temple. Now, he is clearly teaching this collection of Irish people deep truths of the faith. And because he is an Irish Jesus speaking to Irish people, it only makes sense that this Jesus looks, well, like that. But this is also a Canadian story, because one of the foundational stories of Canada is what happens when that Irish Jesus entered the New World. I proudly call myself Canadian. My roots are from Scotland and Ireland, and both of those things are completely true. And I would argue that both of those things are equally important. Because the truth about Canada is that many of its inhabitants are indigenous to, or came there from, somewhere else. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, my grand and great-great-grandparents moved from various places around the Emerald Isle and the untamed highlands of Scotland. Now, they came for a variety of reasons. Some of them came out of desperation because they had to. Others came for the hope of a better future for them and their children. And still others for, let's just say, less than noble reasons. But they settled in Canada, made their homes in Canada, raised their children in Canada, and over time began to call themselves Canadian. But the Irish especially were not always welcomed in their new home. Now, to give you just one example, this comes from the Canadian Baptist newspaper in November of 1865. And in it, the article wrote, quote, "The majority of people do not deem the Irish people fit for self-government." In that article, they denigrate the character and the intelligence of the Irish and also Black Americans, as the article also wrote the following: "These are the same objections to granting the elective franchise to the colored population of the South." For generations during these struggles, the Irish people found strength to endure through tight community associations, but also through their churches and through their faith. And eventually, through pluck and tenacity and the strength that comes from faith, they were able to work their way up in society. They were able to get wealth and land and status and influence. And most importantly for these people, they were able to hand that off to their kids. And lo and behold, the Irish brought music, art, industry, innovation, and adventure to Canada and made Canada better. And that's the inspiration of this story, especially for those of you who may be new to Canada watching this right now. Your story belongs here. And historically, what has made Canada great is combining these stories and making the nation stronger and better. That's the inspirational part of this message. Here's the cautionary tale. As their fears of making it in the New World lessened, comfort began to grow. And that image of Jesus that these maligned and ostracized Irish had used to strengthen them during those times began to transform into something else entirely. Because while the Irish brought culture, unfortunately, they also brought some culture wars. Protestant Irish attacked Catholic Irish. Irish politicians and church leaders engaged in a battle of dominance over areas like education, laws, languages, and even what kind of immigrants could follow them to Canada. Through success in these various culture wars, they were able to impose their cultured understandings of the faith onto other cultures' understanding of the faith and make their Jesus the dominant way of understanding Jesus in and around Canada. Now, that dominance made life increasingly difficult for the varieties of First Nations peoples who had been here long before any European ever set foot in Canada. And it also made life difficult for subsequent generations of immigrants, Both of these two groups of people, if I can use that term, had to find new ways to understand their culture and their faith in ways that almost bowed a knee to this new dominant way of understanding Christianity, for example. And many of you watching this right now know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're new to Canada, you're very aware of the stories that have created this place, and you're trying to figure out, how does your story fit in? Which part of you belongs to the culture of your ancestors? Which part is being formed by Canada? Which of these can you blend together? Because as a historian of Canada, I can tell you, it is the blending together of those things that forms the history of the nation. And if you are a Christian, I hope you can be inspired by the numerous biblical stories of describing the kingdom of God as being peopled by citizens of every tribe and tongue and nation coming together for mutual transformation, mutual support, and mutual shaping, rather than dominance. My Celtic ancestors were the victims of a lack of hospitality. But what makes this story very sad for myself is when they were finally able to find their footing in this land, they failed to listen to the very basic teachings of Jesus to treat others as they wished they had been treated. The history of Canada is one of multiculturalism. We can learn from the past by listening to stories that move us beyond simply understanding the multicultural nature of Canada, merely tolerating the cultures and the opinions of others, into a more intercultural view. Being able to celebrate the differences of others as being able to strengthen us all. And here's a practical way for you to practice intercultural sensitivity right now. Now, some of you watching this might think it's inappropriate that I'm in a pub with a pint. Fair enough. I totally understand where you're coming from. But in Ireland, pints and pubs, which by the way is just short for public houses, are an accepted and honestly essential form of community. These are places where people gather and sing and laugh and dance and tell stories and just be together. And perhaps you might be invited into a place like this some point in the future. If this causes you a little bit of dis-ease, I want to invite you into a little bit more of an intercultural sensitivity, a willingness and ability to walk into spaces like that and reserve judgment. I'm not saying you have to like it. I'm not even saying you have to agree. But if we want to grow in our faith and as a nation, both things I'm hoping we would like to, don't let it make your ears deaf to the stories you might hear. All right? Sláinte.